It had been quite some time since the nightmares had returned. I should have known that once more dreaming about the terrors I experienced while facing off against the beasts of the late, cruel Sorcerer King Willis Afterian was a sign that one of his soul-stealing monstrosities had returned. While I feel I'd be more equipped to handle threats of his now, that does not mean I was happy to hear that a new dragon, possibly associated with his other creatures, has reared its head in the present day. Over the last month, the number of deaths due to dragon attacks has rapidly increased in the area surrounding New Fazbear, the place where I had a harrowing battle with Afterian's monsters. At first, the upsurge in deaths was not associated with one specific beast, as the rare survivors of the recent attacks claimed to see different types of dragons assaulting them and their allies. But one common trait emerged. All those who had been attacked had seen a large pair of glowing yellow eyes approaching before the assaults began. While the dragons that have attacked all appear different on the outside, the beast beneath is the same, the mimicking Endogorn. This horrific monster is itself quite lean, near skeletal when seen on rare occasions in its natural form, though it is allegedly still incredibly durable in spite of this, and it is rarely seen without a morbidly acquired disguise. This creature's magical abilities sound very much like what I'd expect from a beast of Willis Afterian. To disguise itself, it will take the corpse of a deceased dragon or beast, peel the flesh from its body, then wrap itself in some of the hide. The dark sorcery imbued within this beast will then take over, melding the flesh of this creature's body, expanding it, and making the monster look like a copy of the beast whose hide it embodies. It will even take on abilities and some traits of the deceased creature, meaning if this beast found the hide of something as powerful as, say, a bald fist swinger or something of that same level of might, it could spell disaster. Now, I have yet to see this beast for myself. I've had much on my plate as of late, and am still undecided if I will go after it, but the reason I know so much about it is because of allies of mine at the Slayers of Cursed Predators. They informed me that they'd found a man named Arnaldo Rhodes, who claims to have been the one responsible for accidentally unleashing the mimicking Endogorn upon the world. He himself barely escaped it with his life, and claims it and other monstrosities like it hunted him through a mysterious underground castle he was led to by a disembodied voice in his dreams. The voice called herself Lady Fiona, and told him where to go to find her when he awoke. Arnaldo is a simple, overworked farmhand, but felt driven to go and seek this voice out. At first, when he got to the small valley between two large mountains where the voice had told him to go, he found nothing. Until some ruins caught his eye. He ventured closer to them and found that there seemed to be what little remained of a relatively small castle ground. He wandered around the fallen bricks with moss grown and strewn over them, until he found a door in the ground. It took time to clear rocks and grass away from it, but he was able to open it. Then he proceeded to go inside, but a part of him knew even in that moment that he should not. Still, he felt beckoned by the voice and marched down into the darkness. The journey he undertook down there may be a tale I tell in its own time, and while thankfully he did escape with his life, the unfortunate result of this venture was also freeing the long-dormant beast, the mimicking Endogorn. Arnaldo has informed us that he does not believe this creature was made by Afterian, but by someone who once worked for him, called Sir Edwario Murtaugh. Arnaldo did warn, though, that this creation is just as vile as anything the cruel king made himself, and could have dangerous abilities we've yet to discover. I don't believe it would be possible, but if there is any chance this creature could find some way to resurrect the king, then it absolutely must be hastily stopped. For the good of the world of the living, King Willis Afterian cannot be allowed to come back. Now, while it is certainly not a pleasant set of memories, it may be time for me now to revisit my experiences with the creatures of the Fazbean Kingdom, so I can be prepared if any more reveal themselves. So, I return now to the first time I began considering that the tales of this cursed place could actually be true. Despite my many years of studying the creatures and beasts of my world, there was always one set of myths and rumors I'd been too skeptical and admittedly too intimidated to investigate myself. But seeing as how I've recently been granted new abilities as the being meant to watch over my world, I finally decided to look into the eerie legends of the Fazbean Kingdom. You see, so the stories go, nearly 50 years ago, there was an island off the coast of the Americas where stood the Fazbean Kingdom. It was prosperous and had a loving royal family watching over it. But when the king's son, Prince Willis Afterian, took over from his father, things slowly began to go horribly wrong. He seemed to be a decent leader at first, but with his royal minister, Henrik Emil, the two began indulging in sorcery to create creatures that were meant to watch over their island home and protect people. Or so was the claim. At first, it was told that they'd succeeded. They'd genuinely become adept enough at magic to create fully realized beasts that could watch over the island's residents. They'd even designed them to be cute looking, as to not scare the kingdom's children. But slowly, over the next few years, the creatures began to deteriorate and go from adorable to unsettling to downright horrifying. But even before that, something worse had started to occur. Children began to disappear. King Willis claimed this was simply further reason they needed his and Henrik's creations, that something had come to their home for the children and that they needed more of these creatures to protect the residents. Henrik backed up his king even after Henrik's own daughter disappeared. He believed in their work and was willing to keep at it. For a while, at least. One day at a kingdom festival, Willis and Henrik had brought some of their creations for people to meet up close and interact with, to show that they weren't dangerous. But one of the creatures that was brought, a beast that had become like a face to the kingdom, the Fredulin bear dragon, was being pestered by some local children. They were poking him with sticks and taunting him to try and get a rise out of the creature. This group was led by the king's eldest son, Prince Michelangelo Afterian. As the children continued to pester, another came over to try and stop them, the king's youngest son, whose name I've heard various accounts and iterations of. Regardless, as he arrived, the creature's rage was reaching a boiling point. It thrashed its jaws at the boys, with all of them diving out of the way in time. Except for the one that had tried to stop the taunting. The young prince was snatched up and devoured by the bear dragon. After that incident, the king and Henrik tried desperately to assure people that these creatures were not dangerous, that this was a fluke. But it was fairly evident that people were losing faith in their leaders. And as time went on, people would find they had every reason to be more than skeptical of the intentions of their precious royal family. Months after the devouring of the prince, with more children still disappearing, Henrik Emil finally gave up his creature creation efforts. His daughter was gone. He no longer believed his work was helping people, and he tried to convince King Willis to put their creations to rest. But despite his son being killed, Willis refused, further claiming the need for their creations. Eventually, Emil gave up trying to convince his old friend and simply left the kingdom, along with a handful of other citizens who were growing wary of the king's sanity. Many did still believe in him and his creations, though, and were excited to see when he created another round of these monsters, meant to be even more, as he called it, fun-loving and protective of the kingdom's children. He kept his previous creations closer to his castle grounds and away from people for a while, but even with these so-called new and improved creatures out there, children continued to go missing. Many were growing more and more suspicious of the king and his beasts, and it wasn't long before his creations started to show an alarming hostility towards any adults that came across them. Some of them were still proving to be very pleasant towards children, but they seemed to despise anyone past their teen years, even often showing hostility towards the king himself. Finally, one of them devoured a local innocent farmer, and that was the final straw for many of the island's residents. More than 80% of people packed up their homes and families and fled for the mainland to find new homes, where they could be safe from these monsters. Obviously, they didn't know much about the world they were stepping into, as my whole world is full of creatures with a lust for devouring humans, but at least they'd be away from King Willis. Because you see, after one of these new and supposedly improved monsters began openly attacking adults, Willis's remaining son, Michelangelo, began to investigate his father's work. The king became a recluse and avoided public appearances, even refusing to let his own son anywhere near the dungeon where he conducted his experiments. But Michelangelo felt the people needed answers, so one night he broke into his father's experimentation chambers and found something worse than he'd feared. Sprawled about the keep were the bloodied, tattered clothes of children from the kingdom. Not only had the creatures been killing kids themselves, but Willis had been bringing children down to his dungeon to feed them to his beasts. King Willis was a murderer, and his son had to expose him. But before Michelangelo could flee the chamber, Willis descended into their depths. Confronted by his father and his horrible actions, Michelangelo drew a blade on his own flesh and blood, and his father didn't even try to reason with him. The old king drew an axe and the two of them had at it. They went blow for blow, with Michelangelo being the superior swordsman, but the king having a manic demeanor that made him far more dangerous. In the midst of the fight, Michelangelo tried to get his father to tell him why he'd been doing all this. What was there to gain from these killings? But King Willis simply replied, "Why not? It's my kingdom, I can do what I please." Eventually, the prince would get a blow in on his father's arm, and the king would resort to a dangerous act. He opened the cage of one of his very first creature creations, a golden rabbit dragon. But the beast, instead of attacking the prince, devoured his creator. King Willis had been mauled by his own creation. It did then attack the prince and significantly wound him, but he was able to flee and tell the villagers what had occurred. With that, the rest of the islanders fled their home, leaving this once proud land totally uninhabited, save for the king's monsters, who now remain there feasting on beings or beasts that make their way to the lands. Which leads me to my own investigation into these events. I first sought out the exact location of this fabled land, and in my search found the shoreline kingdom of Emil. On the closest mainland shore of where the deadly island can be found, Willis's minister, Henrik Emil, had made a new home for all who had fled the Fazbean kingdom. They live there in peace and safety from the creatures of their old home, but upon questioning the locals further, it seems many people will still attempt to go back to the island for their old belongings and never be seen again. The only man to ever make it there and back was Michelangelo himself, who'd apparently gone back many times to try and slay his father's creations. On his return journeys, he's told tales of how the creatures have all become withered and horrifying to behold, and how they were far more vicious now than ever before. He claimed that most violent of them all was the one that had slain his father. The golden decaying beast seemed to have it out for Michelangelo, and waited near the shores of the island for the boy to return, so he could finally kill the death-defying prince. He said it was almost as if this wasn't a mindless beast at all, but somehow his own father, the king, reincarnated inside this creature, waiting to take revenge on the boy who had taken away the last of his kingdom. After hearing those tales, I finally decided to venture to the island myself. The whole land was dying and crumbling. The creatures lurked in the withering woods and in the bowels of the castle, and when I did finally encounter one up close, it immediately tried to devour me. It was a monstrous nightmare bird beast with a red eye and rows of massive teeth. It was like a zombified dragon with a slowly decaying body. It came at me as if I'd just laid waste to its nest. Never before have I seen such fury in the eyes of a creature. But in my time fleeing from the beast, I was able to use the abilities I've recently acquired to look into the energy makeup of the creature's body and see something that shouldn't have been there. This creature did possess a soul, but a frail and decaying one that didn't seem to fit into the creature's body. It was like its own being was simultaneously trying to reject and embrace the soul within itself. I was barely able to escape this creature, and others lurked towards me as I made my way back to the shores. Well, I've seen hundreds of horrific beasts in my time, from the monolithic shin god to the withering skull spewer. The creatures that hunted me in my brief time on this island were easily the most unnerving. With all I learned from the locals of the Kingdom of Emil, and from what I'd seen with my own eyes, I was able to form a theory about what had gone so wrong with these creatures. King Willis, for whatever his sadistic reasons, had created these monstrosities with an inherent desire to devour children, possibly on command only. But not fully understanding the powers he was channeling when he made them, he gave these creatures an ability that, honestly, I'm not even certain is possible. But if it is, then maybe he gave them the ability to absorb the souls of those they consumed. If that is the case, they could have inherited the souls of those poor children, but also twisted and deformed them, making all the monsters on the island a horrific, homunculus blend of child and beast. This may explain why they then started attacking adults. In their confused and altered state of being, they may have started seeing anyone of similar age to Willis as the reason for them being the way they are. Now, as their states have deteriorated more and more, they've become so enraged that they'll simply attack anyone who finds their way to the once proud kingdom. If all of this is true, which even to me still feels like it could be a stretch, that would mean that King Willis's soul is still haunting the Isle, but now with all the power of one of his own beasts. I quickly fled the island, trying to figure out what step to take next. I had no definitive proof of my theory, but I knew that I had to do something. This was not a task I'd be able to undertake on my own with my current level of experience as the overseer of my world. But I swore after that event, after my time on that horrific island, that I'd find a way to return and free the souls trapped inside those monsters, and try to set everything right in the Fazbean Kingdom once and for all. For 4 months, I'd had a recurring nightmare. The souls of terrified children screaming for my help from within decaying, horrific monstrosities that descended upon me from every direction. I often knew it was a dream, but it was horrifying all the same, as I was painfully aware that those same creatures haunting my nightmares did indeed exist in the real world. For me to finally sleep soundly and save the tormented souls of those children, I feared I had to do something I dreaded the thought of for months. I had to return to the Fazbean Kingdom. On my way there, I'd planned to stop at the Kingdom of Emil, the shoreline safe haven Henrik Emil had created after he and many others had finally fled from the island kingdom of Fazbear, after many started to see the terror being brought upon them by the cursed dragons of King Willis Aftirian, those same very beasts that they'd been told were made to protect them. But when I arrived at the spot I knew Emil's kingdom to be, something else was in its place. The kingdom walls were still there, but all the surrounding homes and camps were gone. Cheery, excited people bustled in and out of the castle grounds through the main gates, upon which read a sign that seemed designed to be pleasant, but shot a chill down my spine. Welcome to New Fazbear. I wandered inside and saw vendors selling their goods and people sprawled about enjoying food and games. It didn't seem like anyone lived here, but more so like a place people came to enjoy the day. Everyone seemed happy to be there, and many parents were there with their young children, which is what initially had been concerning me most. That is, until a loud roar bellowed from the nearby shore. My hand shot down to the hilt of my blade, but everyone around me exploded in cheers. I watched with my whole body tensed as a dragon burst from the water and soared over the kingdom wall. It was a smiley alligator beast that twirled through the air, spraying a mist of water over the onlookers. People cleared a space for it to land, and all the children rushed towards it. I wanted to stop them, but what could I do or say? Everything here seemed perfectly fine, and if I didn't know anything about the Fazbean Kingdom or the horrors of its creatures, I'd have thought all was well too. I tried using my abilities as the overseer of my world to look into this creature's body for any sign of captured souls that shouldn't have been there, like the beasts of the Fazbear kingdom had possessed, taken from their helpless victims. But something was keeping me from seeing into this creature. I could see inside the bodies of all the civilians around me, but not this beast. Was this the work of King Afterian's sorcery? Was he somehow back? My heart thudded as in the distance I heard the sound of another creature from a farther part of the castle. I wandered through the vast kingdom grounds, finding many seemingly pleasant monsters running around and playing with the children. There was a drake that had the head of a sun, and a purple zburator with flowing hair that extended like a second tail from its head. The more I saw, the more I prayed it was the last I'd see. After wandering the grounds for an hour, I finally spotted someone that may be able to answer any of my many questions. It was a woman in full guard attire who was pacing around keeping an eye on the goings-on. I marched up to her and asked her what was going on here, what had happened to the kingdom of Emil, and where had these creatures come from. She could tell I was flustered, but responded calmly, first introducing herself as Vanny, New Fazbear's guard. She had no idea what I meant by the kingdom of Emil. She'd worked on these grounds for 2 months, having been hired away from her previous kingdom for a significant sum of gold. She'd been instructed to arrive near the day's end, ensure all the vendors and people left by sundown, and close the gates at night. She'd never met her employer in person, but was always promptly paid by couriers. It alarmed me that she was the only guard hired, responsible to ensure everyone was out of these massively vast grounds by the day's end. But then again, part of me suspected that whoever was running this place didn't really want everyone out before Vanny shut the gates. I followed along with Vanny as she marched around with a gong, ushering people to the exits at the day's end. I quietly told her all I knew about the last Fazbear kingdom, and about the peaceful people who had resided here just 4 months ago. She was skeptical but clearly sensed some truth in what I was saying. She said that a few parents had claimed their children had gone missing on the grounds and never turned up, but eventually she stopped hearing from those parents. She assumed they'd found their children elsewhere, but she'd never been certain. There had also been one creature that had started getting a little too aggressive, a glamorous bird dragon, but the day after it started acting up, it had disappeared. Vanny assumed the owners of the castle had dealt with it. She'd also never stayed inside the kingdom walls at night. She simply closed up and marched around the outside of the grounds. But that night, she and I would both stay inside. As night fell, it appeared that we and the creatures that were hidden somewhere inside were the only beings left. Oddly, Vanny had started to close the gates with us inside, and I stopped her, saying we may need a fast way out. Hesitantly, she let the gates remain open, but that didn't last long. As we were only a few meters inside the walls, the purple wolf dragon crashed down between us and the open gate. It still wore a smile, but it was far from the pleasant one it had had earlier. Its eyes were wide, and green slime dripped from its maw. Its grin twitched as one of its eyes fluttered open and shut. Everything about this creature churned my insides, and that was even before it slashed its tail at the chain that held up the gate, destroying it and sending the barrier crashing down. I drew my blade and for the first time noticed that Vanny had no weapon. I should have seen that before. As the creature slowly marched forth, I decided this had been ill-planned on my part. I raised my arm to use my abilities to teleport us out of there, but just before doing so, we heard a call from farther inside the castle walls. It was the voice of a small child, saying, "I want to go home, help!" The creature before us suddenly looked past us, then burst into the air, soaring over our heads. It vanished into another part of the castle grounds, headed straight towards the call. Instinctively, I started to run after it, assuming Vanny was running along behind me. My mind raced. How many children had already been lost to this place? How many souls had been taken because I'd been too cowardly to come here sooner? I was just about to race around a corner when I glanced back and noticed Vanny was gone. I stopped and looked in every direction, but nobody was in sight, save for a small white rabbit that hopped along the grass. I called for Vanny quietly, then a bit louder. There was no response. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me and whipped around, then looked up. What I saw wasn't Vanny or the purple creature, but this beast seemed much more interested in me than hunting down the child. Perched on the edge of the castle wall was the sun-headed drake, with the same eerie grin that seemed a signature of all these creatures. It made a guttural, choking sound that slowly changed into a call like a laugh. I didn't have time for this. I needed to find the child and Vanny and get out. I took a step towards where the child's cry had come from, and the creature let out a shriek and started clawing at its own face. It began pulling flesh from the left side of its head as it leaned back and back and back until it fell over the castle wall out of sight. I heard its body thudding around as though it were having a seizure. Then everything stopped. I wanted to run, but part of me, the inquisitive beast chronicler part, forced me to stay and see what had just happened. It was a terrible instinct. A paw lunged over the wall and gripped the top. It crawled over slowly. The creature was similar in shape to how it had appeared a moment ago, but now it had a black and white and purple hide. Its face had become half-scarred black, and its eyes shone red. Any hints of positivity had vanished from its grin, which now exuded pure evil. As it finished its crawl over the wall, it stopped for a brief moment, tilted its head at me, then sprinted towards me on all fours. Before I could consciously decide to run or fight, my body decided for me. I ran straight towards a castle tower with a door too small for the creature to fit through. I didn't make it. The beast's massive paw swatted at my side and slammed me into a wall, rattling my entire body. It moved between me and the door, so I ran the other way. Another paw swiped just behind me but missed as I turned a corner. Right next to me was a hall into the castle. I skidded through dirt and sprinted in. The creature just barely fit through this hall and banged through walls as it chased me down. Barely lit by a torch ahead, I could see a smaller doorway coming up, and I picked up pace as much as I could. A paw slammed against my back, trying to grab me. Instead, it thrust me forward right into the doorway, and I rolled to a stop. The arm of the beast reached in to grab me but came just short of snatching my leg as its shoulder caught in the doorway. I scrambled backwards until I was against the farthest stone wall. The creature thrashed around trying to get in, but eventually pulled its arm back and just stared a glowing red eye in, as if waiting for me to emerge. I looked around for the faint source of light in the room. It was a flickering torch spilling in from the next room, and it seemed to be moving. Not just moving, but moving away. The room got darker and darker, so I followed the light. I stepped cautiously into an open hall, and a small figure ran with a torch a ways ahead. I tried to call after, saying I was there to help, but I couldn't blame them for not stopping. If that was the trapped child, I imagined they were terrified. I kept running and made ground on them, but not before they bent around a corner and burst out of the tower into a clearing. They suddenly stopped and looked straight up. I got closer and closer to recognize the figure as a young boy, but before I could reach him, there was a bellowing shriek from above. The boy screamed, though barely audibly, over the sound of a decaying beast, whose claw thrust down from the sky, snatched him up, and shot back into the air. I ran into the clearing to see a pink, near-zombified wyvern with a shattered mouth carrying the boy up and tossing him on top of the tallest tower. He cried and cried for help as the creature landed down next to him and slowly lowered its head. I grabbed a rock off the ground and hurled it with all my might at the dragon. It barely reached and just thudded against the creature's leg, but it got the beast's attention. The monster turned from the boy and swooped down to the ground before me. I didn't know how much good my blade could do against it, but at least it was away from the boy. I tried to lure it farther and farther from him as I tried to plan. My teleportation was slow and not precise enough to get up to him, and if I left to save my own life, it was possible I couldn't even get myself back in here easily. The creature swung its wing at me and I leapt over, rolling across it and landing back on the ground just in time for its tail to smack against me, slamming me back to the ground. I tried to leap up, but a foot stomped down and pinned me. Its decaying head slowly lowered towards me, with blood dripping from its maw. It got within an inch of my face and breathed a nauseous puff of air at me. I thrashed to wiggle my arms free, but nothing worked. But just as it opened its maw to devour me, I noticed, once again, a white rabbit hopping along the clearing. It briefly caught the dragon's attention too, before an arrow shot through the air and impaled right into the monster's eye. It let out a blood-churning shriek and whipped its head up with its free eye to see Vanny atop the tower with the boy, wielding a crossbow, on which she was loading another shot. The creature shot off the ground, and just in time, I leapt up and grabbed hold of its tail. It soared up above the tower and I sprang off, just barely catching the ledge and clambering onto the tower next to them. Vanny stood between the boy and the beast and fired another bolt, this one piercing the side of the creature's neck. It shrieked again and swung its tail at us all. Vanny tackled the boy to the ground, and I barely ducked under as well as the strike smashed stones free from the tower that went careening to the ground below. My eyes followed them to see the other monsters all crawling their way towards us. There was no winning this fight, at least not today. I tapped the runes on my forearm to start opening a portal as Vanny loaded another shot into her bow. Just before I could complete the process, the creature's claw thrust down. Vanny shoved me aside and the creature grabbed her instead, then soared up. Her crossbow fell from her hands, but I wasn't close enough to catch it. Luckily, the boy reached his arm over the castle wall and snatched the weapon himself. He clumsily but quickly aimed it up and fired right at the creature's foot. The arrow was just off course, but Vanny thrust her arm out and caught it out of the air. She slammed the arrow into the toe of the creature and it released its grip. She fell nearly 20 feet and was going to miss the tower. As fast as I could, I snatched up the boy and leapt over the side of the wall with him. We free fell with Vanny as I finished tapping the runes on my forearms to make a portal. Just before we could hit the earth, the portal opened and we flew through it, changing directions from shooting towards the earth to rolling along it, bouncing across a dirt floor in a forest far away. With a dwindling call from one of the beasts, the portal closed behind us. We all panted and lay on the ground in pain and exhaustion. We'd solved next to nothing, and now, instead of having gotten answers, I only had more questions about the apparently expanding Fazbear kingdom. But at least we'd all gotten out of there alive.
Boy oh boy, it sure would be nice to have hard copies of some of the dragons you're seeing in this video, right? Well, good news, interrupting Benny Shop here to say that some of the FNAF dragons are actually in the Monsters of the Multiverse art book. Along with a whole bunch of other cool stuff. We got Minecraft creatures, we got Ben 10 creatures, we got My Singing Monsters, we got lots of other stuff you could probably get in trouble for selling. Not just dragons neither, like aliens and demons and dinosaurs and all this kind of cool funky stuff. Or if you want to color some of PopCross's dragons, you could check out the Dragons Coloring Book. I mean, let's face it, some of you people listening could probably color these things cooler than he did anyway, right? So why not take a crack at coloring some of his stuff yourself? Both those and a bunch of other PopCross books are linked in the description. Check them out if you want or don't, because the video is starting up again either way.
I lay on the ground, panting and confused, with so many more questions than I'd ever had before about the Fazbear kingdom. What had happened to Henrik Emil and Michelangelo F. Tyrion? Not to mention all the citizens who'd fled the original island kingdom for safety from the king's creatures. Who was making these new creatures? Was the vile sorcerer king Willis F. Tyrion back in human form once more? And the overarching question that had remained as always, if there were souls of devoured children trapped inside these creatures, how could I set them free? I'd just barely escaped New Fazbear with a small boy who'd been trapped there and the ground's only guard, Vanny. I'd managed to open a portal back to the nexus point of my world, very close to my village. After picking myself up, I suggested we all head there, but soon noticed the boy, who I eventually learned was named Gregor, was anxiously eyeing Vanny and backing away from her. When I asked him why, the boy said, He told me not to trust her. I asked who, but just as I did, I noticed for the third time that eve a small white rabbit hopping along behind Vanny. For the first time, I stared at it closely and noticed it was somewhat transparent. I could faintly make out the grass behind it as it hopped right behind Vanny, who looked at the two of us confused. Before she could say anything, the ephemeral rabbit leapt right into Vanny's body, and she instantly started to shake. Her mouth foamed with blood and her eyes went red. Her mouth peeled back into an eerie grin, and she said, "Leaving so soon, Gregor? But the king will see you now." Her skin suddenly shifted into a bizarre sewn material as she grew 30 feet, her arms stretching into wings and a tail with a blade at its tip spewing from her back. Her head shifted into the shape of a white, rabbit-like dragon, not wholly unlike the rabbit dragon Michelangelo Aftirian had described his late father of possessing. My hand shot down to my blade, but before it was even half drawn, the tattered dragon slammed its head against me and flung me aside. It grabbed Gregor in its massive paw and shot off into the air, right back in the direction of New Fazbear. A jolt of shame at my failure to protect the boy fired through me. Despite being the overseer of my world, imbued with the power to help protect it and its people, I still hadn't figured out how to properly teleport anywhere else in my world other than the Nexus Point. I needed another way to follow after them. As I sprinted towards my village, I swore to myself, "I've had it. This all ends tonight." I took about 10 minutes to get home, where my fateful dragon ally, Violet, rested, finishing recovery from an injury she'd acquired in the Skylands. I bolted into my home, tossed my blade aside, and tore off the wall instead a massive buster blade forged from the crest spikes of a soaring Saigon. I ran back to Violet, leapt on her back, and we shot off after Vanny and Gregor, praying we weren't too late to save them. Even with Violet's short-range teleportation abilities, it still took us 2 hours to reach the shoreline kingdom of New Fazbear, and we certainly didn't appear to a peaceful scene, though it wasn't what I could have expected. Gregor was nowhere in sight. Vanny was clearly visible, swirling through the air above the castle in her dragon form, tearing her claws into another dragon. It had a bear-like head, orange and blue striped skin, and most oddly of all, a top hat. From above, I could see other dragons scouring the grounds, possibly searching for Gregor. Oddly enough, I hoped that was the case. It at least meant he hadn't already been devoured or elsewise killed. The rabbit-like dragon Vanny had become slashed its bladed tail against the bear dragon, who mostly seemed to just be defending itself. But then Vanny tried to soar down towards one of the Central Kingdom towers, and the other dragon swooped in front of her, blocking her path. She shrieked and chomped into the bear dragon's neck. I was tempted to aid the bear dragon, but I didn't know if I should be killing Vanny. She may have only been possessed and not in control of herself. As my mind raced to decide, I noticed a white, horrific-looking spider-like drake darting into the castle halls that Vanny had just tried to fly towards. It must have been where Gregor was. Violet lowered me down and I leapt off. I asked her to help keep any other creatures from entering, and I sprinted in after the spider drake with my Saigon blade drawn. It glowed yellow, lighting my way, but the creature still managed to escape my sight as the halls split and parted in all directions. There was no time for subtlety. I called out, telling Gregor I'd find him and that a creature was coming. Then, suddenly, the pattering of draconic footsteps that had been echoing through the halls ceased. The creature must have heard me. I just hoped Gregor did as well. I continued running through the halls and eventually came to a wide-open, torchlit chamber. Inside were rows of tables, being cleaned off by what at first I thought were humans, but upon closer inspection were only pale, soulless, human-like husks shambling around, tidying the room. My mind didn't have space for more questions, so I ignored the sight and ran through the room to keep looking, when a hand suddenly shot out from under the table ahead. My heart thumped and I swung my blade towards it instinctively, but quickly stopped myself. I skidded to a halt and dove to the ground to look under and see Gregor. I pulled him out, set my sword on the table, and immediately started tapping the runes on my forearm to open a portal. But as soon as I started, the closest pale creature grabbed my arm and started trying to yank me aside. I quickly tore my arm free to start over, but another creature grabbed my other arm and started shaking it. All the pale creatures began lumbering towards me. I shoved them back and reached for my blade, but one pushed it across the table to the ground, clattering against the stone. Soon there were a dozen of these creatures on me, tugging at my limbs and pawing their withered hands at my face. "Gregor, the sword!" I called to him through the mess of creatures. He slid back under the table, but just as he grabbed the blade, a high-pitched, monstrous shriek bellowed through the halls. The whole room shook as a large white fist smashed through one of the walls. Claws and hands tore open a hole in the wall, and through it crawled the spider drake, with purple flames spewing from its maw. I tried to tackle aside the ghastly horde around me and tear my arms free, but it was no use. The drake tossed tables aside as it crept towards Gregor, who could barely lift my blade. The creature walked right up to him, its head inches from his face as it grinned eerily at him and reached its hands down. Gregor used all his strength to swing the blade, but it barely scratched the creature's arm. The beast let out a low shriek, then batted the blade out of his hands. It grabbed Gregor, then crawled back through the hole in which it came. All I could do was watch him be carried away by the beast as I tried to free myself from the grip of the pale creatures. The last thing I heard Gregor yell was, "Get Michelangelo!" Eventually, I took a deep, agitated breath and shoved the creatures enough to lunge over a table away from them. They shambled after me, but I ran over to my sword and grabbed it. I ran right back at them, and with a single spinning swing, I sliced the lot of them in half. Their torsos flopped to the ground, but they kept trying to paw their way towards me. I kicked one aside, then ran after Gregor. "Get Michelangelo?" I repeated to myself. King Aftirian's son? The one who'd overthrown him originally? Was he imprisoned here? I chased after the scuttering footsteps and eventually burst into a clearing. The spider creature was ahead, holding Gregor above him with one hand and digging rapidly into the earth with its others. I ran faster and faster, raising my blade and channeling all my energy into it. The yellow light glowed brighter. The creature noticed my approach and swung its tail. I swung back and sliced the tail clean off with a single stroke. It squealed and dropped Gregor into the hole it had started digging. It spun around and thrust its arm at me next. I swung my blade, slicing its hand clean off. It shrieked again, but turned back to Gregor, who was trying to scramble out of the hole. The creature thrust its remaining limbs up, then slammed them down into the hole around Gregor. There was a dull thud as the earth caved in around the boy. Along with a cascade of dirt, he fell into an open chamber and right through a massive, glowing, eerie green portal below. I scrambled onto the spider drake's back and shoved my blade right through its skull. The creature let out a last fading cry as it slumped to the ground. But not a moment later, Vanny shot across the sky over the hole and dove down into the portal below. I whipped around to see the bear dragon she'd battled landing down behind me and roaring into the portal after her. The purple wolf dragon from earlier that eve turned a corner and ran towards us, but the bear dragon whipped its body around and slammed its tail into the creature, sending it right into a wall. Why was this dragon battling the others? It looked like another of Aftirian's creations. Was there a good soul inside it, somehow controlling it? Then finally, a thought crossed my mind. On a whim, I looked up at it and said, "Michelangelo?" It immediately whipped its head around and looked down at me with its eyes wide. I said the name again, but the creature just continued to stare. Maybe I was right, or maybe not, but either way we still had to move. "Can we still save Gregor?" I asked it, completely unsure of how it could reply. It immediately grabbed me in its paw, leapt into the air, and lunged down into the portal. Just before passing through, I whistled as loud as I could. I hoped it worked. We came out the other side, and it was dark. Only lit by the glow of my blade and the dim light of the portal, I could see we were in a dungeon. It was full of smashed vials and spilling liquid and stacks of tattered books on sorcery. Up ahead was Vanny in her dragon form, with Gregor wrapped in her tail as she was sliding open a massive cage with her paw. Through her maw rumbled the words,
"I've brought him, Master, the final soul. Come back to me."
As the screeching of the cage door halted, a silence fell over the dungeon. Then, a gargling roar like a demonic chuckle bellowed out as a decaying claw stomped forth. Lumbering into the dim light was the burnt and decaying body of the once golden rabbit dragon, long thought to have contained the tyrannical soul of King Willis Aftirian. The king's husk of a dragon snatched Gregor and smacked Vannis aside. It seemed to grin at the child, though through its decaying skull head, it was hard to tell. I turned to the bear dragon and yelled, "Toss me!" Immediately, the creature hurled me with incredible might towards Afterian. It noticed me too late and I skewered its already muscle-exposed shoulder. It barely reacted though, just angrily turning its head towards me, then lunging its teeth. Instinctively, stupidly, I leapt away, leaving the blade in place. Just as I landed, the dragon struck me with its paw, sending me soaring across the room, slamming through a table. It hurt, but adrenaline allowed me to leap up fast. The bear dragon let out a bellowing, furious roar that shook the dungeon as it stomped towards Afterian. The demonic dragon chuckled, then shot straight up, smashing through the ceiling above. The bear dragon soared after him. I leapt onto its tail as it swooped up and out of the dungeon. I crawled my way up its tail onto its back, finally getting a look at our surroundings and realizing I was back at a place I had long dreaded returning to, the original island home of the Fazbear Kingdom. The castle was crumbling, the trees were withering, and all around were decaying monstrous dragons Afterian had created, many of which had the souls of poor, terrified children likely trapped within them. They were horrific to behold, but a firm reminder of why this had to end. Afterian swooped through the air and flew back down towards us, still holding Gregor in its paw. It drove its teeth right into the bear dragon's neck and sent us crashing towards the earth. I leapt from my mount on the bear dragon towards the beast's shoulder to grab my blade, but it swatted me with its wing and smacked me off course. I fell towards the ground, spinning out of control. I started tapping my arm, but knew I didn't have time to make a portal. I was mere feet from the ground when suddenly Violet sprung out of the dungeon and snatched me from the air. Thankfully, she'd heard my whistle. As we flew up, Afterian slammed his foe down into the dirt. The bear dragon, through its pain, tried to reach for Gregor, but the monster raised the boy away and bit into the bear dragon's arm, nearly tearing it off. Gregor was shaking and horrified, but Afterian had raised him right next to my blade, still stuck in its shoulder. Gregor quickly noticed, and through his fear he grabbed the blade and yanked it out. Quickly, he raised it above his head, letting out a nervous battle cry. The blade shone from yellow to pink, and he slashed it right through the creature's arm, cutting it clean off, dropping Gregor to the ground. The dragon shrieked angrily and snapped his jaws towards the boy, but the bear dragon slammed its head forward, blocking the strike. Afterian furiously flew up above the castle, shrieking a menacing roar that rang across the island. Close by, I could still see some of the dragons, a pink, fox-like creature, and a withering golden bird dragon that had attacked me on my last visit. Both were cowering at the sound of Afterian's cry. It was the only time I'd seen fear from these creatures, and as terrified as I was of them, I sprinted towards the bird dragon and stood before it. My heart thudded as I yelled, "Don't fear him! Don't you see he can be beaten? Together you're stronger than he is!" The creature started lowering its head towards me, and I desperately wanted to back away, but didn't. It soon turned its head up to Afterian again above. It then turned to another creature who was now looking at the cruel king. Soon, a beast in the distance flew up into the air and started soaring towards Afterian. Then another, and another. The two creatures near me followed suit, along with Violet, and soon the bear dragon was airborne again and joining them. They surrounded the vile king in the air, and he swirled around, shrieking and snapping his jaws. None backed down. They all at once, in a unified horde, shot towards Afterian and began to tear his already decaying body apart. As blood and limbs sprayed overhead, I had to look away as I ran back over to Gregor. He too averted his eyes until the shrieking sounds above stopped, and instead a golden light shone down on us. Where Afterian's dragon had once been, now only remained a golden orb of light that slowly faded away. Seconds later, the menacing bird dragon dropped to the ground. Another golden light emerged from its body, then soon after, vanished as well. The same happened to another creature, then another and another. I knew what this had to be. These golden lights were the souls, finally being freed after being prisoners for so long in these creatures. The final one to drop was the bear dragon. As the golden light emerged from it, a faint voice could be heard with the words ringing around us, Thank you. As light of day started to crest over the mountains, I finally allowed it to sink in that the nightmare was over. Soon after, we found Vanny back in her human form, also freed from the possession placed on her by a minion of Afterian. I still had unanswered questions that maybe I'd never know the answer to, but at least the vile king's reign was over. All were freed and nobody would ever again have to die at the jaws of a creature from what was once the Fazbear kingdom.
If you enjoyed this, you might want to check out my trilogy of Five Nights at Freddy's animatronics as mech armors. Or if you just want another nice long dragon compilation, you could check out my Marvel characters as dragons video. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course we're ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote from Marcus Aurelius, who said, "You don't need to have an opinion about everything. Don't get worked up over things you can't control. These things didn't ask for your attention. Leave them alone." Especially from scrolling through social media a bunch or something like that, you can end up getting really riled up and angry about things that aren't really worth your attention. Instead, you could be using that energy to work towards something you care about, instead of just getting mad about something that's not worth your time in the first place. I hope that's inspiring, I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday.